have the hope and aspiration to achieve them, and if one makes the effort and one's faculties are strong enough, one could achieve them.
Even the first would be very difficult.
Excuse me?
Even the first level would be very difficult.
It's difficult, I mean, even for us, but one can achieve them, and I know of lay people who do achieve them. And what I found, you know, by questioning and the talk that comes around, this is interesting, you know, it's a little bit, in a way, contradictory to what the texts say, but it seems that the ability to achieve the jhanas depends to a great extent on a person's aptitude, mental disposition, rather than their way of life. So, many monastics who lead very diligent lives of meditation don't achieve the jhanas. Whereas sometimes I hear of lay people who just meditate for a short time and they're said to achieve them.
And that's been in some of the Buddha's stories, I believe.
One sees them in some of the stories.
Like that.
Usually what they get like that is stages of awakening. The jhanas usually take some persistent effort. It's not just like instantaneous. It takes some effort, but I hear like lay people who go to a meditation center and stay for some time, and it might be their first time at a meditation center, and they achieve the jhanas. Whereas monks who are practicing diligently, maybe for years, don't achieve them. So it depends, I would say, it doesn't mean that I should just become a lay person, get a 9 to 5 or or 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. job and hope to achieve the jhanas that way. But it seems that a lot that goes into this is what we would consider a person's paramis, that is, the qualities that they've developed in earlier lives, as well as just certain faculties that certain people might have. But what I would say is that the way of life that conduces better to the achievement of the jhana, or that conduces more effectively to the achievement of jhana, is a monastic way of life. So even the lay people who I hear achieve the jhanas do so by going to a meditation center or a monastery to do a long period of meditation. Not that they sit, with, Wall Street or office, thinking, let me take, or the Googleplex in California, and then think, let me just take 15-minute break from meditation, and then they enter the jhana. Maybe some do, but
Can you use the microphone, please?
yeah, I want the microphone.
Could you please define a certain degree of some concentration for insight meditator?
Okay, the question is, can I please describe or define what is meant by a certain degree of samadhi or concentration for practicing insight meditation? Actually, there isn't really a fixed degree of samadhi, because some teachers use, in the approach of dry insight, start the meditator off using the approach of dry insight, even from the start. And so what they do is to start with an object that's always changing, and just note mindfully whatever object arises to the mind. So, for example, in the Burmese system of Mahasi Soyador, one begins usually with observing the rising and falling of the abdomen. Then if one experiences a wandering thought, one just makes the mental note, wandering mind. If one is remembering something, one notes remembering. If one is planning, one notes planning. If one feels pain in the body, one notes pain. If one feels pressure, one notes pressure. If one feels hotness or coolness, one notes hotness, coolness. So one keeps on noting. But then what happens through the continued process of noting, then the mindfulness becomes stabilized, so that one is mindful of every experience that's occurring. And then the mind can remain on its object consistently over an extended period, observing the changes taking place in that object. And by focusing on an object that's changing and observing the changes, then one goes very directly into the insight of impermanence, even without going through a fixed kind of samadhi. But other teachers try to lead the student to the development of what's called upachara samadhi, access concentration, in which the nimitta appears, but the mental factors are not yet strong enough to put the mind into jhana. Then once the mind is able to go into access concentration, then the teacher will guide the student into the practice of insight meditation. Or some teachers like Goenka, in the Goenka system, one doesn't even aim to go into access concentration. But in his typical 10-day course, one spends the first, I think it's 3.5 days, just focusing on the breath, the sensation of the breath around the nostrils. And then one moves into on the 4th day, into the practice of insight by observing the sensations in the body. So that's a kind of, well, it's one size fits all for everybody. So it's always, everybody has the same instruction, 3.5 days of the concentration practice, and then on the 4th day, afternoon, start with the insight practice. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
Bhante, would it be possible to achieve one of these jhana state outside of the meditative experience? Basically outside of the sitting or walking meditation like in our daily life?
I don't see how that would be possible. It could be that somebody who has very strong spiritual faculties might, without having learned formal meditation, might say sit down at a quiet place and then just start focusing on the breath and then just spontaneously go into the jhanic state. But that would be very, very rare, and only because that person has already somehow built up a strong faculty of concentration. But cases like that would be so rare as to scarcely be worth mentioning.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, would it be possible to carry the state of meditation, concentration, even after one gets up from the
Oh, I see, to carry the concentration after getting up.
Throughout the day, yeah.
One can keep some degree of concentration throughout the day, but one can't go about one's activities in a state of jhana. It has to be done in the sitting meditation, because what happens even in the first jhana is that the factors, these two factors of applied thought and sustained thought, have to be focused on one object, which is the object of concentration. And if one is going about one's activities, one has to have different changing objects. Okay, I want to just take some of these internet questions, then I want to come back and try to finish the sutta. Okay, what is the difference between piti and sukha? I don't want to go into a technical discussion of the difference, but let it just suffice to say that piti is what is translated as rapture. It's a joyful, exhilarating state, whereas sukha is mental pleasure, a feeling of pleasure. Okay, then next question. Nowhere is it mentioned that in the process of developing the 4 jhanas that all 5 senses stop functioning. Why is it not included as part of the 5 jhana factors in describing jhana? Yeah, it's simply nowhere said that the 5 senses stop functioning. And it's only in connection with the formless jhanas that that the senses stop functioning. Okay, it is said that without completely letting go of attachment to the body, it is impossible to attain jhana. It seems that total abandonment of the 5 hindrances include letting go of bodily awareness. I have to say, this gets to a rather technical point, but to my mind, this is not so compatible with what is said in the sutta. The sutta seems to indicate that there is a bodily awareness even in the jhana, since it speaks about the meditator pervading, how does it go? He drenches, steeps, fills, and pervades this body with the pleasure of the jhana. Okay, I want to move on now to try to finish the sutta. Okay, the 4 jhanas represent the achievement of samadhi, which is mental concentration. And this is the second stage of the threefold training. It's not yet liberation, not yet nirvana, but it's just a strengthening of the mind, the opening up of new dimensions of experience, so that the mind can then be used for developing insight or wisdom. And it's insight or wisdom that will bring liberation. And so in a straight development of the path, the meditator can go directly from the jhanas to the development of insight. But in this sutta, the Buddha is going to explain the development of wisdom or knowledge in terms of 3 higher knowledges. The first 2, strictly speaking, are not necessary parts of the path. But the Buddha himself experienced these with his own achievement of enlightenment, and he taught them since many of his disciples apparently had the ability to achieve these states. I think there's also a subtext here, or a little bit of an agenda, which explains why the Buddha often explains the achievement of enlightenment in terms of these 3 knowledges. Okay, now these 3 knowledges, the Pali word is vijja. Ooh. You see, you have to be more mindful. Okay, now the Brahmins in the Buddha's time had a group of texts that they regarded as sacred. They're holy scriptures, which they memorized and recited and used for the performance of rituals. And these texts were called the Vedas. And there were 3 Vedas: the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Yajur Veda. Now, the word, Sanskrit word vidya, or Pali word vijja, originally meant knowledge of the Vedas, the wisdom that the Brahmins believe they derive from the study of the Vedas. And so a Brahmin who mastered the 3 Vedas was called Tevicha, one who knows the 3 Vedas. It's a little bit like in our time we have PhD, Doctor of Philosophy. You know, that's in the educational field, that's considered the crowning achievement. So for the Brahmins, the crowning achievement was to be Tevicha, a master of the 3 Vedas. And now sort of if we read the text in this kind of, maybe call it, this we call post-structuralist or life, you know, trying to look for underlying agendas, we can see that the Buddha is setting up a different set of 3 knowledges against the knowledges of the Brahmins. So for the Buddha, the 3 knowledges are the knowledge of one's previous lives, the knowledge of how beings pass away and take rebirth in accordance with their karma, and the third is knowledge of the destruction of the defilements. Of these 3, the one that's really important, that's essential in the Buddha's scheme of the path is the third knowledge, knowledge of the destruction of defilements. But again, for the reasons that I said, partly because the Buddha wanted his disciples to achieve the same knowledges that he himself realized, at least those disciples who had the ability to achieve them. And partly, I think, or I suspect, to sort of counterbalance the 3 knowledges of the Brahmins, the Buddha often speaks of these 3 higher knowledges as goals for a disciple to achieve. And these higher knowledges, especially the first 2, are achieved on the basis of the 4 jhanas. So first one has to master the 4th jhana to make the mind very calm, concentrated, collected in the 4th jhana. And then on that basis, one directs one's attention back throughout one's present life, and then directs the attention back past the moment of conception in this life, till it sort of breaks through that barrier put up by the previous death, and one is able to recollect one's immediate past life. Then one repeats the process, going back through one's immediate past life till one comes to the moment of conception in that life. Then again one directs the mind more and more strongly till one breaks through the barrier of the preceding death, and one can recollect the life before that. And so as one sort of cultivates the skill, the time comes when one can recollect many past lives. So the sutta says, when his concentrated mind is thus purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfections, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability, he directs it to knowledge of the recollection of past lives. He recollects his manifold past lives, 1 birth, 2 births, then it goes on 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, to page 105, 50, 100, 1,000, 100,000 births, many aeons of world contraction, many aeons of world expansion, many aeons of world expansion and contraction. Okay, so one knows what one was named, what one looked like, what kind of food one ate, very important. One's experience of pleasure and pain, how long one lived, how one passed away, where one was reborn next, and so on and so on. Then the simile compares this to a man who might go from one village, from his own village to another village, then perhaps even to other villages, and then return to his own village. And so he could remember at a later time, I went from my own village to that village, there I stood in such a way, sat in such a way, spoke in such a way, kept silent in such a way, then I went from that village to another village, and so on and so on and so on, until I came back to my own village. Okay, so in this way he recollects his many past lives with their aspects and their details. So that is the first higher knowledge. The second higher knowledge, again with the concentrated mind, he directs his mind to knowledge of the passing away and rebirth of other beings. And then he sees how beings pass away and take rebirth in accordance with their karma. This is on page 106. You can read it on your own, but basically he sees